My name's Monk Rowe, and we're interviewing for the Jazz Archive at Hamilton College on campus with Eric Alexander. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I have a little scenario I was going to start out with. Let's suppose my son or daughter is about 19, which is now past, but they're an avid jazz musician, quite passionate, and they're looking at a career in jazz. And I say to them, that's an awful tough life with not much security, et cetera, et cetera. And they answer to me, yeah, but look at Eric Alexander. Is that a
valid response?
valid response to my parental concern?
Well, if they knew a lot about me, it might be semi-valid because, if they were to say, look, Eric Alexander, when he was 18 or 19 years old, knew about 2 tunes by heart, couldn't improvise through a jazz blues effectively, didn't know the changes to that. And he told his parents the same thing, and they said, you're crazy, stick a fork in that idea, but he figured out how to play in a very short period of time and ended up having a relatively successful career. If they knew all that information, I would say, wow, it's actually not such a bad answer. I think that if I were a parent and I wasn't who I am, I think, but I had some understanding of the situation, I think what I would tell my kids is, there's no time like the present. If you really want to give this a shot, do it while you're young. Devote 5 or 6 years of your life to pursuing this dream as best you can with every ounce of effort you have and every bit of love you have for the music. See where that takes you, And if you get to a point where it becomes, painfully, for sure, but painfully apparent that you just aren't going to be able to do it, you'll have time to turn around and do something else. But don't let a really deep-seated love for the music fester inside your body until you're a middle-aged person, and then suddenly freak out and tell your wife or husband, oh my God, I've been living a lie my whole life. I have to pursue my dream of jazz. I'm quitting my job and I'll try to support the kids as best I can, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I've seen that happen to people, and I think that's really a far scarier scenario than, a late teen person, with a certain amount of musical talent thinking, yeah, I want to give this a try. I think it's okay to try things when you're young because you have time to recover.
So you weren't one of those junior high students who would blow people away at the local jazz festival?
I'm not going to lie about that. I was certainly a musical standout, but compared to what, I mean, in a small town in Washington State where nobody in my age group knew how to improvise at all, really, to speak of, the fact that I knew how to play a blues scale and do something semi-convincingly, it sounded very appealing to the adults and the music teachers who heard me do it. But the reality is, compared to the other people in my age bracket that had been serious about playing music, in other parts of the country, and had really, listened to the right things and practiced the right things, if you were to stack me up against them at that point, you'd say, well, this guy has absolutely no chance. If you were to take it at face value at that point, you'd say he's in a completely different ballpark than these people. But that having been said, and like I said before, I mean, I firmly believe that everyone sort of has their time, their really fruitful period where the music kind of chooses them, as opposed to someone deciding, out of blue, I want to be a jazz musician. Something happens, they hear something, they have a certain experience, and it's almost like the music takes them over. And if you really use that moment in your life, effectively, and like I said, do the right things and follow that passion, you can make up for so much, whatever you want to call it, lost time or time that you didn't do the right things. You can catch up quickly.
What was your moment?
I didn't really have a specific moment, but what I can tell you is I'm wearing the shirt today, interestingly enough. I went to Indiana University right out of high school, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to play music, but I was involved in the jazz program there as part of, an overall liberal arts degree. Within the first week of arriving there, I heard people in the practice rooms at the music school doing things I couldn't believe. I hadn't heard people do that before. And my first thought was, oh my God, I'll never be able to do that. But that thought was shortly followed by, I'm going to figure that out and do it better than them. Sort of like a competitive impulse. And then, of course, I met other students there who had, record collections. And they had all these things that I had never heard. So they're playing me music that it's really like I'd been waiting my whole life to hear this music and never had a chance to really hear it. So when suddenly, you're given these kinds of experiences or you have these kinds of experiences, I mean, if you're ready for it, if it's kind of like a dormant volcano inside you, it's just, really takes you over.
Wow. Did your you had mentioned yesterday your father listening to you practice, and can't you play a song all the way through or something? Yeah. Did you win them over, your parents, with your dedication?
I don't think my parents really ever knew until later how dedicated I was. Because I think the proof is really in the pudding. And I wasn't living with them. I was far away from home when this started to happen to me. I had periods of time in high school where I would prepare very diligently, for a saxophone recital, classical saxophone. I would learn a piece and, make big strides and have some effective practice moments. They knew I was talented. All of the teachers would tell them, oh, your son's very talented. And my parents are musical as well, so they could hear it. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they ever, I don't know what they thought. I'm sure they were a little bit uneasy about, not when I went to Indiana University, they were fine with that. It was at the end of that first year when I said, I'm going to New York, I'm leaving Indiana. I want to go right to where everything's happening. I might not even go to school, Dad. I might just go try to figure out how to play in Greenwich Village. And another one of his classic lines, he said, if you do that, kid, you'll be selling your ass within a week. Ouch. So I think at that, so at that point they sort of rallied. Well, my parents are divorced, but they joined forces and said, look, you're not dropping out of school. If you want to go to the New York area, you better find some place where you can get a degree and at least be somewhere safe. Well, while you're pursuing this cockamamie idea. So I found William Patterson, a friend of mine and I found William Patterson College. Just sort of, I don't even know how we found it. It's really serendipitous, I don't know how these things fall into place. But it was sort of a last ditch. It was the last place we could possibly apply to in the late part of the spring semester. And we sent audition tapes, and Rufus Reed, who was the head of the department, heard our audition tapes, and for whatever reason, even though they weren't very good, said, yeah, these guys have some talent. I'm letting them in. They really want this. We were begging and pleading. And then the next semester, I get to William Patterson, and the first instructor I had in the small group ensemble was Harold Neighbor. And really, the rest is history.
Did he must have recognized something in you.
He claims he does.
Uh-huh.
I don't say this to try to be funny or make the story more interesting. I can't figure out what he saw in me.
There's a little thing on, I'm not sure whose website it is, if it's yours or his or somewhere, that a little thing about you playing a ballad. He told you to play a ballad. It might have been Embraceable.
He taught me Embraceable You.
Yeah. And he must have, I have to think that he heard something that made him feel like, okay, this student's worth my while to...
Well, I mean, I can only speculate. I'll tell you, I was very scared. But so ignorant was I didn't know who Harold Neighbor was. I mean, I could tell that he was somebody super important, but I didn't know who he was. And, I had spent that summer switching from alto saxophone to tenor, and I had just gotten an old Auto-Link mouthpiece, which is what I've been playing since then, and I had figured out how to play it, and I'd been listening to some Coltrane records and kind of trying to approximate that sound. So maybe when I played the melody, so nervous and disoriented was I that I'm really taking my time and not overblowing, and maybe some little bits of that influence were coming out in kind of it almost could sound like I was patient as opposed to terrified. Maybe that's what he heard. Wow, this guy's patient. Maybe, yeah, he has a little bit of Coltrane in that sound. And then maybe I was able to get off one or two, I don't know, little melodic ideas that were reminiscent of something. Mm-hmm. But I do remember him asking me right after that, he said, "Young man, who are your favorite tenor players?" And I only knew about 6. So I said Coltrane, and then for number 2, and I didn't say it necessarily because it was true, it was the first name that came to my mind. I said George Coleman, and then I said Sonny Rollins. And for him, and see, that's luck again, that's the perfect answer for him, because he puts Coltrane number 1, but George Coleman number 2, and the great Sonny Rollins, of course, everyone loves him. He puts him number 3, but unlike most people who put Sonny Rollins and Train neck and neck, Harold and people that are close to George and love George always put him right after Train.
Huh. And a lot of people, George Coleman is on a lot of people's lists.
He's off the radar.
Yeah. And was that because of your compatriots at Indiana?
Did I mention George Coleman? I swear I really don't know why. I think maybe in a Downbeat mag. Of course I had heard him on recording. I used to listen to Maiden Voyage, so he's one of the tenor players that I knew of. But I remember there was an ad in Downbeat magazine for these plastic reeds, which I don't think he ever used.
Yeah.
But he was one of the endorsers. And I just remember his signature. His signature is very clean. It's like the way he plays. He doesn't make a big hoop and slop to the end. He takes his time. It's like Joe DiMaggio's signature or something.
Oh.
So that signature was kind of in my mind, too. I just said George Coleman.
That's neat. How that stuff happens.
But then, the Monk, the truth is that did become my order, my top 3.
And he sent you to George Coleman, right?
But he told me to go see him. I never went to see him. I saw George play live. I was so scared of that man. I didn't want to be within 5 feet of him. I didn't go actually see him until, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been after my senior year or maybe after my junior year, but it wasn't right away.
What was scary about him?
Well, if you don't know him, first of all, he's physically imposing. He looks like an NFL linebacker. And musically very imposing. Plays the keys off the saxophone and he's doing things that you can't imagine ever being able to do. As a young player, you're sitting there listening to him. How is he switching keys? How is he playing so fast? How does he play ballads like that? Everything. It's just... Like I said yesterday, it's like standing at the base of Mount Everest and looking up. It's scary. I didn't want to get too close to that.
Right. So your degree was in jazz performance?
I guess that's what it's called. I haven't even looked at my diploma, to be honest. I mean, I graduated with really good marks.
Okay. But you didn't get, like some parents would say, okay, do the music thing, but at least get a teaching degree to fall back on.
No.
Okay. You don't have the fall back on.
No. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And I suppose I shouldn't use myself necessarily as a reference for everyone. But I just really believe that there are many people who share a similar level of talent. Harold was talking yesterday about 97% perspiration, 3% inspiration. I believe there are many, many people that are gifted, at least to a certain level. We're not all Mozart or Charlie Parker, but we have, there are many people with a certain level of musical talent, a gift, if you will. And it's really just those that do the right things and stay on a very consistent path make the right choices, there are a lot of things that come into play. Who do you meet on the way up? You know, if I hadn't met the people on the way up that I met, you know, what would have happened to me?
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. But that is why I say if you have a certain level of talent and you really want it, spend those years pursuing it. You know, that's the time.
Mm-hmm. The Thelonious Monk competition, what you came in second place one year, I guess. Did that do anything for you, ostensibly? Open any doors for you, or?
It made it so that people who had never heard of me before had now heard of me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I guess that did something for me. I think I got one gig directly related to that. So in terms of work, not really. And I don't think it got me any record deals or anything like that. There were no record companies climbing around me. They're all climbing around number one.
I see.
Number two and the rest were out. You know,
That's
pretty much we're on our own. But we all, not me so much, but many of the other guys already had been working with people. You know, they were already pretty high-profile professional guys.
Okay.
I think the prerequisite, or one of the prerequisites to be in the competition was that you did not have a leader recording released on a major label. But there was no prerequisite, you know, you can't have worked with a jazz legend, because these guys certainly had. I mean, I know, among others, I know Chris Potter was working with Red Rodney at that time, you know, and some of the guys, Todd Williams and some of the other saxophonists had been working with Wynton. And I know Joshua had already played at the Village Vanguard and played with his father, and probably Ed Blackwell and a number of different people, you know, so he'd had some good experience too. And I was just starting to get some experience at that point with Charles Irwin out in Chicago. But I think, okay, so to go back to the question, I think that the biggest thing it probably gave me was more hope, you know, made me realize, okay, I'm right there, you know, and I can get better too. You know, I heard things that some of the other players were doing, and I said to myself, you know, why didn't I do that? If I had just done that, you know, I know what that is. I can play like that. I don't have to be. I was a real anachronism style player at that point. You know, I played just like Dexter Gordon, which was very appealing to some people. That there wasn't enough Eric Alexander in there. I don't think.
How the heck do you make a living after you graduate from college and you're out pursuing a career in jazz?
Well,
how did you manage that?
I mean, you try as hard as you can to get any sort of gig where you're using your instrument to make money. And if you don't get enough gigs to support your, you know, to support yourself, to pay your rent and buy you food and whatever else you need to survive, then you get another job, you know, outside the music business. I used to be so disappointed that I didn't have, you know, what we call jobbing gigs. A lot of my friends did
like
weddings,
club dates,
weddings, private parties. I tried to break into that scene, and I was really unsuccessful. I'm not sure why. I would go to these auditions and just bottom out. Never got those gigs. So the only thing
Can I ask a question there? You auditioned for club dates and weddings.
In New York, it's pretty cutthroat. In Chicago, too. You know, you have to go to these agencies that contract all the work. And they say, okay, kid, do you know Hava Nagila? And you say, okay, and you kind of play it. And then they name, you know, 25 other Jewish melodies that you're supposed to know. Wow. No, I didn't know any. And then they say, well, okay, what about, they start naming, you know, pop rock tunes and things like that, that you're supposed to know the background parts to these things, you know.
I have not heard this anecdote. Are you playing with anybody at that point, or are you just standing by yourself?
I was just by myself. You know, if a contractor, if somebody calls you and says, we have a wedding gig, you know, it's in Southampton, you got to get there by 6, you know, these things pay good. You're going to be in a horn section with a trumpet, trombone, and, you know, the rhythm section, 2 vocalists. You have to show up out there, and these guys really do put the thing together. Some of the wedding bands were and are, consistent units that always move around together, but very often they throw people together. And it's kind of like a jazz gig. I mean, you have to know all these background parts and things that, you're supposed to be able to do like that. I didn't know any of it. It's pretty tricky too to get the knowledge without having had the experience in order to acquire it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless you went out on the gigs and had to hear all these background parts and fumble through it a few times, I don't know how else you get it. It still kind of vexes me. Maybe there are some books you can get to study it, or someone can prep you.
I think
sure.
it comes more from your listening habits. If you listen to Motown a lot or that kind of music, but again, you do then need to get thrown into a situation where you
But so
get
anyway,
to try it.
for whatever reason, I just never got those gigs. So it was either playing on the street with my friends in New York. There were one or two clubs that we had little, pass the hat gigs for per week. And then it was, telemarketing during the day for me. Things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember for about 6 months selling surgical gloves over the phone. That was my job. I'd get there and, 9 to 5, sell surgical gloves. And go home and practice for 4 hours and just be exhausted and go to sleep and get up and do it again. But one of the things was when I went to New York, you see, because after I graduated from William Patterson, I went to Chicago for 2 years. And there I was making a living playing music exclusively. My cost of living was really low, and I got to the point where I had 5 or 6 nights of work a week with organ trios and singers on the South Side. So after 2 years, I said, all right, I'm going to go to New York now. Let's make this final step. This is even after the Thelonious Monk thing. So imagine that. I mean, after I came in second in the Thelonious Monk competition, and you asked me, what did it do for you? I'm selling surgical gloves, telemarketing. This is like a year and a half after that competition.
Wow, okay.
And this is even when I've started to make some recordings too. I just had this idea in my mind, all right, if I can't get to a reasonable standard of living and lifestyle playing music by the time I'm 25, I'll quit. And I don't know if that was true or not. I never had to find out.
Oh, that's good. Most
And
people would
things just
extend
started-
that. They'd
Right.
say, okay, you're going to give it 2 more years or
I don't
something.
think I would have quit.
Yeah. I can't imagine that. Because you seem to have the passion and the drive to keep going. Which sort of begs the question, at what level do you ever say, okay, this is where I wanted to be? Are you there now? Or do you just not have a specific level in mind?
Well, I think it's less specific than that. It's almost, well, first of all, I can say that I'm more comfortable with my playing than I've ever been. I feel better about it. That's the first part of it. But second, I'm not satisfied either. And it really comes down to, gig to gig. Sometimes I'll go out on a gig and I'll feel great and feel like I could do anything that I wanted to do. And I have to say, well, it's never so good, it couldn't get better. And then the next gig, go out and you don't feel good, you feel like you play really poorly. And then you have to say, well, it's not so bad, it couldn't be worse. You have to have a very even keel about how you react to how you're doing, because some days are great, but there are going to be just as many days that aren't so great, and you can't beat yourself up, but you also can't get cocky if you're doing well, You just have to stay focused and sort of, so it's kind of philosophical. You have an ideal in your mind of what would be perfect, and you just keep moving towards it. But that ideal morphs and changes over the years too, so you'll never get there. It's like chasing a rainbow.
Mm-hmm. I sometimes wonder if you watch basketball players, for instance, and they have this tremendous night. Everything's falling, and they're in the right place at the right time. And I wonder if they think, why can't I do that every night?
I'm sure they do, but I think, through experience, they know that they can't. And, B, they've realized that oftentimes you know, the truth is you want your worst to be good enough, you know, or your average to be better than most. You're great, okay, it's going to be great. And anybody can have every dog has his day. Everyone can have a great day. But you want to get to the point where, you know, your average performance is pretty damn good, I guess. Consistency is important.
That's a good way to put it. What's it like having you have a family, but much of your work is not, you know, within 50 miles of your
Right.
home?
What is that like? Well, it's definitely hard on me, but it's certainly harder on my wife. I think the kids are okay. You know, they've known that scenario their entire lives. That's what they know. They know Dad's in and out. We have a great family, and my wife is, you know, she's tough as nails. If it weren't for her, I mean, none of this would be possible. That's for sure, because she's a, you know, full-time professor and half-time single mom. Really. You know, half the time she has my help, but half the time she doesn't. So she's got a lot on the table.
Mm-hmm. What does she teach?
She's a professor of Spanish
Okay.
at Fordham University.
Does she like the music that you play?
She likes it a lot.
Good.
She's not, I mean, she'll tell you she's not a music expert. She's not even particularly musical. She doesn't sing or play an instrument. She doesn't really know anything about music in terms of the nuts and bolts of how things work. But I mean, I guess being around me and all the great musicians that she's had the chance to meet through me, and she's had the chance to hear them play, I think she has a very good appreciation. You know, she has a great appreciation, but she has discerning taste now. She knows when things are jive and when they're happening. Mm-hmm. She can really tell. So that's lucky. I feel fortunate about that. I have some friends whose wives really dislike what they do for a living, dislike the whole jazz scene and the kind of people that are there, and don't even really like the music. Mm-hmm. That's got to be really hard. I can't imagine that.
So if you have, I know you do some teaching at Purchase, and the students you saw yesterday here, if they said to you, how do I get into the scene like you? Are there any specific things you can say to them, except don't take my gig, you know?
I mean, you know, I'd have to go individual by individual. I'd have to spend a little time with them and see where they are and see how they progress after a few weeks of doing some things that I ask them to do. But you have to have a certain repertoire internalized. You know, jazz musicians have to know hundreds of tunes, and I think most of these young people know very few. So it's a huge problem. I'd have them spend a ton of time memorizing, you know, the jazz repertoire, which means, you know, American popular standards that jazz musicians favor and jazz originals that have become classics that everyone knows. I mean, you just start with that, and you're talking hundreds of tunes. And it's the kind of stuff they have to know if they're going to walk into a jam session in New York City, take their horn out, and whoever's on stage starts playing, you know, Along Came Betty, just for instance. That's a, you know, jazz original that everyone has to know. There's no choice about it. You can't say, oh, well, I wanted to play, but I don't know that tune, so I'll put my horn back in the case. That's a big strike. And people notice that kind of stuff. Or even worse, let me pull out my real book. Nobody wants to see that.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. So I would say learning tunes is hugely important, and it's just better for your musicianship in general. And I think they need, all of them, based on what I heard yesterday, need to absorb, I mean, some jazz language, but a ton more than they have. You know, you can't talk to other jazz musicians unless you know the language. I mean, that sounds very simplistic, but it's absolutely true. You can't just play some kind of grouping of notes that doesn't swing and doesn't have the right kind of, you know, effect in terms of the way you're presenting your sound and your articulation. There are certain ways jazz musicians do things. That's not to say there's one way. There are many ways, you know, within this big room. But you have to be in there You have to have a connection to the history of the music, and I just don't think they've done enough serious listening. They haven't immersed themselves, in the river, in that big continuum that, is at the end and at the beginning at the same time. You got to jump in there and float for a couple of years and suck up the past, present, and future of the music. And then you can start to kind of swim around in there and do something. But otherwise, you're just flailing and you're going to drown. You have no place being there until you've kind of soaked it up.
Do you give your students a list of must-know songs?
I don't, but I should. One of the reasons I don't is that there are tunes that I don't know that I should know. But what I do insist on is that they keep a tune list and that they try to learn, and they don't do it very well. I'm really pissed off at them. I tell them every week, 2 tunes. I want 2 tunes this week, and you have to be able to play these tunes with flair and confidence. There's no rhythm section here. Take out your horn and play that tune. I don't care if you make a mistake here and there, but I want the time to be strong from beginning to end. And if you flub a note, who cares? Recover and keep going, because that's what you're going to have to do when you're playing anyway. They have to be able to do that, and they have to be able to improvise on their own. They have to be the piano, bass, drums, and saxophone by themselves. And if you can do that, okay, I'll give it to you. You know the tune. Put it on your list, and review your list every day. If you're getting foggy on something, touch it up. It's a little disappointing to me because I feel like the formula is actually incredibly simple. I suppose, but actually sticking to it and following it is difficult because people just can't do it. It's not like learning algebra. It's like 5 things. Work on your sound, learn tunes, learn vocabulary, practice things through the keys. I don't even know what the other thing would be. Play with people. Get people together and try all these concepts out. It's like 5 things. Just do it every day of your life for the next 5 years and see where you are.
That's a tall order for most young musicians, I think.
Well, I just think this is a real ADD generation, too. I mean, I guess my generation was also, compared to previous generations, it's really a problem.
I was going to ask, because Harold was talking yesterday about going on the road and the guys had their stacks of LPs,
Mm-hmm.
and that was their source, and it was heavy, and it was work to carry it around.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering if the technology and everything at our fingertips is good and bad.
It's definitely bad in some ways. One of the most obvious ways that it's bad that is painfully obvious to me. If I give one kid Charlie Parker with strings, and I say, this is the only thing you're allowed to listen to for 6 months, and I want you to learn every note that he plays on at least 2 or 3 of these tunes. And then another guy I give a 30 gigabyte iPod and say, have fun. I guarantee the guy with the 1 record is going to come out better. He's going to learn more. There's no question. Because playing this music is about knowing. It's not how much you know, but it's how well you know what you supposedly know. If you have a little bit of information that you have absolutely mastered, you're going to play better than somebody with kind of a vague understanding of a lot of things. Because in order to be effective as an improviser, you have to be able to. It's not like somebody who could pass a test. There are people all over the United States, or all over the world for that matter, that could sit down and pass a theory test. Okay, what scale do you use over a minor 7 chord? Fine. How do you spell a dominant 13 flat 9? Fine. I can answer all these questions. That doesn't amount to a hill of beans, though, when you're on the bandstand and, Louis Hayes is playing 300 miles an hour on the drums and Harold's playing piano. You have to hear these things and play something immediately that's going to work. You don't have time to think, oh, yeah, I guess that's the Dorian scale. By the time you thought that, 5 bars have gone by. You don't even know where you are in the tune.
Right.
So it's more important to have a small reservoir of information that you really have mastered than a lot of information that you sort of understand a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem with the technology, to me. Plus, there was something so, you got more of a feeling for the music. When I would hold the records that I would buy, I'd wait all week and I'd have, $15, so I figure I could get 2 records. I'd go buy my 2 records and just riding back on the subway or whatever, reading the liner notes, just couldn't wait to get home and put it on and check it out. Plus, you have to sit there and listen to it because you're going to have to flip it, And it's too much of a pain to go up and pick the needle and drop between tracks, so you actually sit and listen to one side of the record. And then you flip it over and listen to the second side, And then if there's a particular song that you really like, you have to expend a little bit of energy, to put the needle on that song. It's not like click, 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 click. Oh, I'm tired of that. Spin, spin, another genre, It's just too much information.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
What experiences that you had, perhaps with Charles Earland or some of the other fellows that you were a sideman with, impacted your eventual role as a leader? Did you learn stuff from those guys, musically and otherwise, that helped you out?
Well, I've been lucky. All the guys that I came up playing with, they share. One of the things they shared is they play music like it's the last time they'll ever play. It's almost like somebody said, "This is the last song you're ever going to play. You better have fun." They give everything they have at all times. I guess it's just that they respect. They're not thinking about it, but if you had to give a reason why are they playing it, they just respect and love the music so much. They would never give less than 100%. I remember playing with Charles Earland in this huge room in Rochester. It was Thanksgiving, 1990. Was it 90 or 91? Maybe it was 91. And there were maybe 4 people in this cavernous room. And he played like a 2-hour set and almost blew the organ up and was sweating all over the place. And I was like, what's he doing? Why is he doing this? Can't we just go home? But this stuff started to rub off on me. Playing with Harold, if you don't bring your A game and really step up, he's going to it's like a tsunami. You're going to be swept away and be very insignificant very fast. You have to step up and do something. Pat Martino, same kind of thing. These guys play so strong. You really have to get in there and it's not like you're fighting with them, but if you don't show that you have some kind of personality and something to add, you will be erased quickly. And all these guys have such a tremendous sense of rhythm. When I think of all of them, they don't need a drummer or a bass player to create a sense of groove and swing. Harold sits down at the piano. He can play by himself. That's good. That's fine. I'll pay the price of admission for that. I'd pay the price of admission just to hear him comp. So strong and infectious is his, rhythmic style. So those things really rubbed off on me, just passion to play and always try to bring your A game and have a really strong rhythm. And really, play the kind of music that you love. Don't play music that all these guys have figured out over the years what they love to do, and they stick to it. There's a certain thing in this music, go with what you know, go with what you love. Because not everyone can do everything. There's no point in trying. You really have to, within the framework, okay, I'm a jazz musician, you have to figure out what standards you really enjoy playing. What kind of tempos you favor, what kinds of keys you favor. Major or minor, things like that.
Is there a scenario that you could imagine where you got a phone call to do something that could be a significant musical move and that you would turn down?
Yeah, and I have.
And what would that be?
Well, I won't say what that was because I turned it down because I didn't. I didn't tell them I can't do it because I don't like this music.
Oh.
I said I had prior commitments.
In a general sense, can you say what kind of things that you wouldn't go for?
It's not so easy because it's really case by case. In other words, I could never say I won't take a smooth jazz gig, because it's not true. I might. If somebody called me and said, look, I'm going to pay you some good money, we want you to come out with this funky smooth jazz band, and Eric, you can just play the way you play. You know, you can kind of do what Miles did. You can put a rock beat behind you, but you just play the way you want to play on top of it. I'd do that in a heartbeat. If somebody said, I want you to come out and I'm going to pay you a lot of money and you have to really try to play like Kenny G. We really want you to get deep into that style. I'd probably have to say, I can't do that. I don't think I could. No disrespect to him. I just don't think I could do that. I think I would be miserable. I mean, maybe, okay, 3 or 4 days and the money was massive. Yeah, I'd go ahead and give it a shot, but that'd be a tough one.
What if someone called and said, we're going to do Ascension?
Oh, I'd
Part
love to
two.
give that a
I'd
try.
like to
Why
try
not?
that
Yeah, that would
kind
be
of
great.
thing.
I'd love that.
Uh-huh.
Anything that Coltrane ever put his stamp on, I'd love to give it a try. I don't know if I could do it. You know, if some people said, you know, we want you to just play absolutely free. There's no chord, no rhythm. We don't want to hear one thing that sounds remotely like anything that's ever been heard before. I might have to really think about that. And certain types of big bands that I know this isn't necessarily the best thing to put on the record, but I don't necessarily enjoy playing in a big band. I find it really tedious. Probably because I haven't played in good big bands. I've only had a few opportunities, and some of them weren't necessarily that good of an opportunity. But it's never been really my I'm more of a small group or medium-sized group guy. That's more my thing.
Do you feel you're a good businessman?
No, not at all. And my
Just-
wife reminds me of that every day. I'm not a good businessman. I never ask for enough money. I never fight as hard as I should, you know, for things. And I don't demand enough. I'm not a diva guy. And it's funny because in this business you see that a lot of musicians, you know, because we play the same places, so you'll show up in some club, you know, and you look at the roster or the lineup that's been there over the course of the last year, you know, so-and-so, you know, big name people. And you start to hear the people at the club, you know, bitching about how so-and-so acted. Oh, they were such a pain. They were demanding this and that. God, I couldn't stand it. You know, and this one, oh, God, it was just awful. What a jerk. The way they treated the staff, and they were so demanding, and they wanted this and that. And you think, yeah, what a creep. But then you also think, and I bet they got a hell of a lot more money than I did, too.
Uh-huh.
You know? So it almost pays to be a jerk sometimes in this music, but I have a hard time being a jerk.
Yeah. I wonder how many return engagements those jerks get.
Well,
If they do well at the door, they
that's
probably
look, that's what it is. Cash, money is the bottom line, and sometimes, you know, these attitudes becomes, you know, part of a somehow in a bizarre, almost like it's almost battered wife syndrome. People start to like it. They like the fact that these people act like jerks, and they come to expect it, and it's part of the whole show. You know, it's very strange. It really is. But I guess if you're great enough, you can do anything you want. You're gonna keep working.
Yeah, that's what annoyed me about the overuse of the word diva. Like, it used to mean something.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be backed up with some
Said you were
incredible
great.
talent.
Right.
So, okay, you can act like that. But
Mm-hmm. Well, then the truth is, it is kind of, you know, then it becomes part of the, you know, folklore of jazz, you know, talking about how somebody was so great and so mean to everyone. Everyone loves to tell their story about how mean so-and-so was and what they said. You know, it becomes part of the history.
yeah.
So your question was, am I a good business?
Do you think you're on top of what your record company does with sales and all that?
No, I'm not.
So you have to have a certain amount of trust in people, I guess.
Are they going to see this interview?
No.
This is the situation I have with my record company. I ask them for CDs to sell on gigs. And I know they're supposed to be charging me for CDs, but I never seem to get bills.
You mean the ones that,
If
in other
I
words,
come
you have to pay for
you have
your
to
own
buy
CDs.
CDs from the company. It's generally, $7 a CD or whatever, and then you sell them for 15 or 20 and you get the profit.
Okay.
I don't really get bills from them for the CDs I've ordered. But then again, I don't really get consistent, royalty checks that I'm supposed to get for certain types of things, for my compositions, or we have some agreements about international sales. And it's almost like I kind of let that slide and they let this slide. Nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in the end, I'm the one that's losing because if they were losing, they would be talking to me about it. So I should think more clearly about this.
Yeah.
But I don't. And other things like my publishing catalog. I mean, I have my works registered and I get royalty checks, but there are other things that I should be and could be doing, and I probably need to be doing.
Yeah. Well, some things never change. The stories are legend about that kind of thing. It's probably better than it used to be.
Yeah.
I would think.
Well, musicians didn't even own their tunes.
Mm-hmm.
At least we own our tunes now, most of us.
Right.
It's not that complicated. You just, get some works registration forms from BMI and register your tunes, and that's it.
Yeah.
And you own them.
But your sidemen, the guys you use on your recordings, they get paid once, correct?
Leaders get paid once too.
Okay.
I'm sure there are some people with different deals with jazz record companies, but that's rare. That's the absolute top level scenario, where you would be getting royalties for sales. It's very rare.
I see.
It's very rare.
So the royalties you get,
They're mechanicals. It's for original compositions.
Okay. Well, there's a good reason to write.
That's one of the reasons that people like Lee Morgan and Hank Mobley wrote 90% of the music on their records.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God they were incredible writers.
Yeah.
And by contrast, this is also one of the problems today. Everyone wants their mechanicals, and everyone thinks they're a good writer, and most people aren't.
Right.
So we see records coming out where, you look at it and you say, oh, not again, and you know what's coming. You put it on, and it's a bunch of stuff that's not really memorable.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of torn. And the last few records, I've probably stepped too far across the line. I've had less originals than ever. I think I've had one original or two originals on the last couple records.
Yeah.
And the rest of the tunes are sort of out of the way, rarely heard standards or strange tunes that people wouldn't even expect me to record that we rework. But I know that people like that. I know that the listeners like it and the radio stations like it. And so it serves me well in that respect. I know the CDs sell very well, compared to other CDs that my company puts out.
Well, that's good to know.
And I know that they always get very good radio play. I mean, every CD I've done for High Note Records has made it to #1 on the radio play chart.
Nice. And I agree with what you're saying. Like that, you did the tune, "It's Magic,"
Mm-hmm.
and it's exactly what you're saying. When I saw that, I go, he did "It's Magic,"
Mm-hmm.
and then I start to sing the song in my head and go, "Whoa, what an interesting choice!"
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to hear what you did with that.
Yeah. But I would be the same way too. I often say, okay, let's say I'm at a jazz festival, and these guys all come back from the beyond for the greatest jam session ever. It's Coltrane. Sonny Rollins, he's here. Sonny's there, and whatever. Johnny Griffin and George Coleman, all these cats. Dexter Gordon. And then the program starts, and it's 5 originals that I've never heard before, and I can't even figure out what the chord changes are. Would I enjoy that? No. What do I want to hear them play? Blues, rhythm changes, and a couple standards, and see who can be the most creative on that, very familiar format, or within that very familiar format. And I think that's one of the things that's made, or one of the real joys of being an educated jazz listener, historically speaking, knowing material before you hear it. Because then you have a frame of reference. You hear a guy do a tune that you've heard a million times before, but he does it a little bit differently. And then his improvisation has, some magical things in it, harmonic substitutions, whatever. And it's like it's a whole different tune. And it really allows you to appreciate what they're doing even more. Because you're listening from a position of knowledge rather than absolute ignorance. I mean, I hear people play sometimes now, and I'm a musician, I'm a professional musician, I have no idea what's going on. I can't tell what time signature they're in. I spend most of the time going like 1, 2, 3, figuring out, okay, they're in 13, all right, and then, by the end of the tune, I'm thinking, oh, what is that? That's like a weird, major 7, flat 5, and then it goes down to minor 3rd, and it's an inverted, strange triad with a strange extension, and by the time they get to the end of the tune, I've figured out a few chords and the time signature, and I haven't heard one thing that the people have played because I've spent the whole time trying to get my bearings so that I could, understand it a little bit. And I don't know how the casual listeners are. I don't know how they're reacting favorably to it because I can't believe that they could be enjoying it as much as they seem to be.
I think that's what, in a lot of the players that started in the 30s, if you ask them about the younger players, a lot of the comments I got were very similar, and that was that all the young people sound the same. And that because they're learning the same scales and all this, and they're not playing music, they're playing the scales and the patterns and stuff. So I think that is true for them too, even though that kind of playing might be standard nowadays. I think my question is there something that is really hard to teach to students?
There are many things that are really hard to teach. In fact, you can only point them. You can kind of you can say, hey, it's in that box over there. It's not in that box, it's in that box, but you have to go get it out. You can't really teach, I mean, in this music, it's a very personal process. So I can say, look, do your long tones. If you do things this way, you might have some success. Listen to these particular recordings, pay close attention, but the work, it's all on them.
And shouldn't it be?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that the people that are going to rise to the top have to have...
Has to come from within them.
Yeah.
You can kind of help them open a couple doors.
Right.
Yeah, but it can be frustrating for students because they think, okay, I'm studying with this person, and I really love their playing. They're going to show me how to play. I'm going to study with this person. I'll learn how to play because I'm studying, and we can't do that. We just can't do it. It's impossible. They need to lock themselves in a room with 2 records and practice 12 hours a day, and then see where they are next year. And it's also hard to work as a teacher week by week. It's not enough time. If I sit down for an hour with somebody and give them a few things to work on, they might need a couple of months to get it together, to the point where we can move on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. So what you end up doing is having, 13 weeks of lesson plans, all, 20% completed by the end of the semester. Then they have stuff to work on, for the next 5 years. But it's really hard to, say, okay, here's your assignment for this week. And then they come back next week and it's nailed. Okay, here's the next assignment. On occasion, you get students that are able to do that, but the vast majority can't do it.
Mm-hmm. We were talking about original compositions, and I wanted to just play a bit here. That's called One for Steve, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you conceive your...
Well, that's just a blues with some different chord changes in it.
Where's the melody come from? You sit with your horn and do it, you do the piano?
On that particular tune, I think I sat with my horn and did it.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much just based on some stuff I heard Coltrane play.
Okay.
Getting up to the ninth of a dominant chord and kind of working your way down.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's not a verbatim thievery of something he played, but the concept is similar. And then I put some different chord changes on the turnaround.
Mm-hmm. And where or when does the decision come, like you decided to have the saxophone and the bass in unison?
We may have just decided that in the studio. A lot of times you show up at a recording session with a very skeletal arrangement or idea of what you're going to do, or even just it's a sketch of a tune, and you just kind of throw ideas around the room, and everyone pipes up with their suggestion or their criticism, and after a few minutes something clicks, and everyone says, okay, yeah, that'll work. But people have to kind of leave their egos at the door to do that. You can't come in with this idea, this is how I wrote my tune, and this is how it's going to be, and we're not going to change it. Because if you do that, you miss out on a lot of creativity and the whole, it's more than a democratic process. I don't even know what you'd call it. It's, boardroom, last minute deals. I don't know what it is. But you're not utilizing your musicians to the degree that you could utilize them if you're just going to be a dictator and say, this is the way it is. It's good if you trust and really admire the musicians you're working with, you should welcome, their input. I mean, sometimes you don't like it. Sometimes they say something, you say, no, I don't agree. Just shut up. That's it. But sometimes, you have to listen to what they say, and they may turn you on to an idea that you hadn't thought of. It happens all the time. We'll get, like the last recording we made, we were trying to play It Might As Well Be Spring, and I don't even remember what groove we had on it in the rehearsal, but in the studio, all of a sudden, Joe Farnsworth, the drummer, said, what about this beat? And he started playing kind of a rumba or Latin flavor beat on it. What happens if we play the tune this way? And it was like a boom. All of a sudden the tune made sense. We were kind of dreading doing it. It was, this is one of those standards that people think is kind of hip if we do it, but we don't really enjoy playing it. And saved it till the end of the date. And he came up with this idea, and it made it so easy to play. And it felt like our arrangement, our individual twist on it. So you have to listen to the musicians.
That's great. Do you have, I know it's sort of hard this day and age to have a working band, keep this group together, and I'm going to give them enough work to stick with me.
Yeah. Or I guess you can put them on retainer. I mean, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I have my number one guys, my pool of guys that I always want to work with. And I try to get them first. And then if I have to go outside that pool, I have another pool that is the second tier or whatever. But it's pretty obvious from, my recordings and when you see me on gigs, who the guys I want, if I have a choice, I'm calling Harold right away, all the time. He can't make everything, so then there are people I move on to from there. And it's the same with Joe Farnsworth and John Weber. I mean, those are the first people I call, because I know we could, fly 36 hours to some remote spot in the farthest reaches of, furthest corner of the world and be exhausted and feel like crap. We could go up on stage and we don't have to have even a talk through. I can just start playing something and they're going to be right there. We can play a whole concert without even discussing one bit of music. So that really gives you a feeling of comfort, they have your back. They're ready to play with you. They like your playing. You like their playing. There's no bullshit, A lot of times when you get up there with musicians that you don't play with on a regular basis, there's a lot of feeling out going on. You're trying to figure out where so-and-so is coming from on the bandstand, and that can really detract from the music. Sometimes it's magical and it's fun to listen to, but usually it kind of lowers the level of creativity that you can get to.
Yeah. What do you say to a student, one of those people who's in a constant search? If I only had this horn, if I only had this mouthpiece, if I only could find a good reed.
Welcome to the club. Join the club. You know, we're all there. Well, let's start with, the mouthpiece and reed. That's your, first connection to the sonic world. I mean, everything starts right there. If your reed isn't working and your mouthpiece stinks, I mean, you're in a world of trouble. I would agree with them. If they're upset and their equipment stinks, I'd be upset too. You gotta go find something that works. But even when you have things that work, that reed, that can be the difference between a great day and a really bad day. It happens to me all the time. Sometimes I feel like I want to throw my mouthpiece out the window. Oh, something's wrong with my mouthpiece. I must have dropped it. I must have bumped it. It's not working. My horn is out of adjustment. And all it is that the reed is no good. So I feel their pain.
Okay.
Finding a reed is hard. Finding a good mouthpiece is hard. The horn, if you have a good horn and it's in good shape, stop blaming the horn. Horn is... Some students that I've come across have awful horns, and I don't know how they can take it. I don't know how they can play with that thing, how they can even get a low note to come out, how they can play in tune. When you're struggling against equipment that doesn't work, that's tough,
Yeah.
But if you have something that's decent, that should be good enough. The horn, I'm sure there are people that would disagree with me, but a decent horn with a great reed and a great mouthpiece, you're okay.
What do you picture for yourself 10 years from now? Do you think that far ahead? Do you have long-term sort of projects?
No. I really
Okay.
don't. My long-term projects are more about things that don't have to do with music, really. The music it's at the top of my list 24 hours a day. But I don't know what my goal is. My goals are very simple. They always involve, I just want to be a better improviser. I want to play better. I want to have a better sound. I want to be able to really impact people immediately when I start playing. First note out of my horn, I want them to say, wow, this guy's got it together. Okay, what's coming next? I mean, I want them to really feel some kind of positive and strong message coming, from me and my horn. I'm not thinking so much, what tunes would I like to do 5 years from now? What kind of music am I going to get into? I'm not thinking about that at all.
Do you think about, I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but do you imagine what your audience is hearing from you? You're thinking about what you're playing yourself, but do you also think about how are they hearing it?
I actually care a lot about my audience. I think that's part of the reason that I usually feel like I play better in front of people than I do when there aren't people around. To me, it's a big part of the equation. People are listening to you and you're speaking to them. That makes it double important. When I'm playing by myself, it's not so important. So I care very deeply about what they think. I mean, not, bitter, nasty people that just say things to be, I can see through that and I don't care. But, whatever sort of fan base I've built up over the years or educated listeners or, in certain parts of the world, I mean, I want to please them. I want to play music that's, on a certain level, challenging. I don't want to play down to anybody, but I also want it to be music that they feel good listening to and that they enjoy. I don't want them to be befuddled and sickened by what I'm doing. I want them to be happy to listen to it, and to leave the club feeling better than they felt, when they came in. It's really important to me. So yes, I do think about how they're listening.
Well, that's a pretty good way to wrap up here, I think. If anything you want to add that you might say, gee, I wish I had said something like that in this interview.
Not really. I think not off the top of my head. I can't think of
Okay.
anything.
Well, I wish you continued success in your career. You know, I can tell you that you're a name that is in the consciousness of most of these young players, whether they're listening to the older fellows or not. They're listening to you, so that's a good thing.
I mean, in a way, it makes me feel good. In a way, it's a lot of pressure too. You know.
Yeah.
I'd hate to feel that I was misleading a generation of young players
I don't think so.
inadvertently.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Monk.
Okay.